And I hope there are lots of questions because this was really interesting. Bernard, I hope you don't mind if I start with you.
Sure, go ahead.
I really want to know more about what it's like to meet the Crown Prince, play video games with him. I mean, how does his personality strike you? When you've been with him, where have you met with him? Just tell us more.
So I've met with him in his office in Riyadh. I've met with him on his farm. I've gone swimming with him in the Red Sea. And also, he has palaces everywhere. And then in his video kind of area. Yeah, I mean, it's just, he's a young guy who, he seems like a guy who's a lot like many other Saudis of his age and his generation. And by the way, he's usually, anecdotally, he's very popular with young people in the kingdom. Older people tend not to like him because he has stripped away a lot of the old ways of doing things, so they feel that their entitlements have been taken away. So there's this generational divide in the country.
Interesting. Just a quick follow-up, because you had told us about the saying about the father's the falconer of his son, so picking for the most successful hunter or ruthlessness. Did you sense any evidence of that in him as you were in his presence?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, he also has a remarkable memory. Like, the conversation I had with him 5 years ago, he remembers the details of the conversation. So there's something, super smart and sharp about him. And he manages everything in the country. Nothing happens without him being directly involved, which of course creates bottlenecks and problems as well. But I imagine with a lot of autocrats who are also populists, like Erdogan, it would be the same. You'd have a person who basically is super, super sharp.
Yeah. Let's see, we have one here. Okay, just let me get started with Suzy, and then we'll go to the questions. Suzy, I was really interested to hear you talk about how autocratic rulers don't just spring up from barren soil, right? That there are things within the country that are already fragile enough to allow for the autocracy to set hold. Can you talk a little bit more about what those things were in Turkey prior to Erdogan?
Well, I mean, one of the ideas I'm sort of working with on this, because I'm still exploring it, I've been working on a book for a long time, is that the Kemalist ideology with which the country was founded, that was founded in 1923, I mean, it was in response to a very different time than today. And the ideology was exclusive. I mean, there was a very strict identity. It was secularist. It was Western-fearing but Western-looking, and there was a sort of idea of what kind of Turkish person you had to be. And of course, this was very, very limiting. And I think, that there were Kurds in the country, there are religious people in the country, and all those pressures. They were pressures on the identity, and so it was crumbling already, but then you get technology, you get globalization, and I think that was already breaking down, and I think that a lot of the original institutions of the country that were also founded at that time were not surviving some of these other challenges. So the old political parties were not working anymore. Erdogan's party came along and they suddenly shook up everything. They were doing things in a different way, and they were just much better at politics. So I think for all of those reasons, it sort of shattered and shook the foundations of the country and the idea of themselves.
Interesting. Okay, over there to mic number 1.
Hi, my name is Gomru Rastanpour. I'm from Portland. I'm Kurdish. Thank you, Suzanne, and thanks for being with us today. I'm wondering about the history, how the history was repeated over and over and over. And Erdogan, that invade, Syria, especially the Kurdish region, and with this excuse that is buffer zone. And then not only in Turkey, not giving any right to Kurdish people and attacking Kurdish people left and right, and has the ISIS hospital. The ISIS hospital was in Turkey and actually give the best treatment to ISIS, the people that they got injured. Over there, they got the best treatment. And then the whole world is silent. And the Kurdish people, and again, the day before yesterday, they got betrayed in Syria. which is we lost 12,000 young people to fight against ISIS just to protect U.S. interests.
You'll have to forgive me for interrupting, but your question?
My question is, thank you, Susan. Just I would like to know your perspective, why the history is just repeating over and over. And the same with, Al-Sharah today and Erdogan. Still all our, leaders, they are in prison. Abdullah Öcalan is in prison.
I'll let her answer. I'll let her answer the question.
Okay, thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, it's been, excuse me?
Go ahead.
It's been one of the great tragedies to watch because I have been there since 2007. I have seen this. I mean, Erdogan was initiating a peace process in the beginning of the time, when I was first there, and there was a lot of hope about that. But Erdogan, as you can tell, I mean, he uses whatever is to his advantage at that time, and however he's going to win more votes. And so, what happened is that eventually he made. He made an alliance with the far-right party, and of course that turned him away from the Kurds, and he started to feel that he needed far-right votes more than he needed Kurdish votes. I agree that Selahattin Demirtas is still in jail. It's really kind of shocking to me. Nobody says anything about it. He was the leader of the pro-Kurdish party for a while in Turkey. And yet again, they are being sacrificed in what is happening in Syria. I think that there haven't really been very strong advocates for them. We see this happen with a lot of minorities, stateless people. And this is happening yet again. I think in the future, Erdogan might need those Kurdish votes again. So we'll see if it shifts yet again, but I'm not really sure.
I see 3, 4, and 2. I'll get to you in just a second. But Bernard, can I ask you a quick question? Mostly because I was very taken by how you started by saying it's best to be super cynical when thinking about the Middle East. And I'm wondering how that applies to the question of whether the changes that the Crown Prince is bringing to Saudi Arabia, there was actually a question from on the screen there from an audience member. Are they sustainable, or are you super cynical about that?
So, firstly, the regimes in the Middle East, whether it's Saudi or are in the business of survival. I often tell my students, think of the Terminator, and those are what these regimes are like. They're like, they will not die. I mean, they're in the business of staying alive. And so their ideological commitments, their policies, if they threaten their survival, will change. It's not like this is a permanent sort of orientation. And so in Saudi specifically, I think the Achilles heel of the regime and of the MBS's project are these big economic plans that are extremely expensive, that need a price of oil, what we call a break-even price of $95 to the barrel, and it's nowhere near that now. So the country has to borrow money to pay for these projects. And there's a question as to whether these projects are economically profitable, sustainable. They haven't been able to attract foreign direct investment. So the threat is, I mean, obviously there's a threat to his life. Someone could try to assassinate him. You've had a former king who was assassinated by a nephew. And he's alienated a lot of people in the royal family. Also Islamists and others. So, there's an assassination threat to him. But the real threat structurally to the system is the economic diversification and whether that can succeed or not. And it's very, very difficult to move a country that is entirely reliant on oil revenues and redistribution, moving from what is called a rentier economy to a productive economy, an economy where you produce things, export them, and generate revenue. That's a super hard thing to do.
If we have time, I'll follow up with you on that. But by the way, that question was from Max Flowers from Portland High School. So let's go up here. I think I saw number 3.
I'm amazed you can see.
Yes. Are the evolving hybrid secular governments the answer to lasting stability in the Middle East region versus hardcore religious governments?
Who is that question for? No,
I think we can both take it.
Yeah.
The entire conference.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know. That's my first answer. I mean, I would say, in Turkey, the Erdogan's party is not a hardcore religious party. It was actually, it did not force the headscarf on people as many people feared. It did not. It was a very gradual there was a kind of a creep of more and more religion into the culture and into the society. And Erdogan's party worked for a while because it was more open and it was more inclusive, and I think it was working better than the secular parties. But over time, because again, he was trying to hold on to power and because he felt these threats, things just changed and evolved. And so he ended up, becoming more of an exclusive party. It was less inclusive. But there are a lot of other reasons why it failed that I really don't think have to do with religion. And I think that that's often been the lesson in Turkey, is that we focus so much on secularism and Islamism and all of that. And I don't think that that's really the story here as much as sometimes we tend to believe.
Oh, interesting.
Can I take a quick
please.
stab? So I think the distinction you make is not apt for understanding what's going on. The distinction that matters is whether you are a national. I mean, MBS is a Muslim, and Islam is a very important aspect of the culture of the country. The distinction he makes is between, are you a nationalist or are you a pan-Islamist? In other words, do you focus on your own country, or do you interfere in, say, how the Chinese are dealing with the Uyghurs and the Muslims, or do you project Islam, like Iran does, for instance, in your policy? Or like Erdogan is trying to do also, using Islamism as a way of talking about other countries and intervening and interfering in other countries. So the MBS model is you stick to your country and you don't use Islam to go outside. And this is, by the way, the condition he has set on President Sharia of Syria. So with President Sharia of Syria, he's told him, Islam is fine as long as you keep it within Syria and you're a nationalist first. Don't interfere with Israel, don't talk about Palestine, don't talk about Lebanon, stick to Syria. That's the division that's happening, that I see, between the pan-Islamists or the people who want to use Islam for broader, for causes that transcend the territorial boundaries of the nation state, versus those who want to just confine their policy to the nation state.
Can I just follow up on that quickly? Because you touched on it earlier, but this seems to be a huge change, right? Because Saudi Arabia beforehand, having seen itself as the heart and therefore the pump that would foster Islam around the world. Right. And when you talked about the very strict form of Islam, was it Wahhabism that you were referring to? Okay, and so to the point that they were funding schools, etc. Is that change between the sort of Saudi nationalism and the global Islam point of view only possible because of the absolute monarchy in Saudi Arabia? Because it sounds like it's a big cultural mindset shift that he's asking people to.
And that was, by the way, that was the big the divide between Jamal Khashoggi and MBS. Jamal was an Islamist, and he felt that Islam was the kind of soft power of the country, and that you needed to use Islam to have kind of an influence around the world if you're Saudi Arabia. And MBS was like, no, I don't want that because it brought me Al-Qaeda, and I want to stop that. So he cut off funding, etc., from mosques and madrasas and all that. So that's a big divide, by the way, within Saudi elites, between what one could call authoritarian liberals. By the way, there are no real liberals in the Middle East. They're all authoritarian. They're socially liberal, but they're not politically liberal. And the Islamists. That's a huge divide within the country. And for now, MBS has kind of sided with the authoritarian liberals. And one other point I would say is that the big divide we now see between Saudi and the UAE, they both hate Islamists. But the UAE is interfering in the name of fighting Islamism with secessionist movements around the region, Sudan, Yemen, Somalia, etc. And that's another big divide, that MBS doesn't want the UAE to be interfering in other countries under any pretext. Just like, stick to your country. That's the kind of message he's sending.
That difference of opinion cost Khashoggi his life, though, right? So,
yeah, it cost him his life, for sure.
Yeah. Let's go up here, then we'll come back down. Mic 4, please.
Hi, my name is Brendan Edwards, and I'm from Edward Little High School. And my question is for Ms. Hansen, and it's the neighborhood divide you discussed. Does this have any similarities or correlation to the immigration divide we have within the U.S. currently?
Yeah, I thought about that a lot. It's a great question. Actually, there's a difference, which was interesting, which is in the neighborhood, the people who were very much against the Syrian refugees, they would speak so openly in racist ways. I mean, I was kind of shocked by how open they were about it. But then I would find, as I spent more time there, that the next day they'd be helping someone get their electricity turned on, a Syrian person, or they would be helping someone, enroll in school. Because these neighborhoods in Istanbul, they want what's best for the neighborhood, right? So they don't want people not doing well economically. They don't want people, not having lights. The health of the neighborhood is this kind of collective thing. It's an Ottoman sort of spirit, and it still exists. So I found that very different because I feel like in America we have liberals who often really say nice things about refugees, but might not actually do anything to help them. So I think it's a little bit of the opposite.
Interesting. So we're going to kind of keep going around in a circle. So mic 2, please.
My name's Alexis Verbivus from Bates College, and I have a question about Erdogan's communication style. He seems to be very personal. He cries a lot. He recites a lot of poems. He sings a lot, and all those things seem to start in around 2016 or something. And I was wondering, how do you see this development in his communication style, from the beginning of his political career and onwards, and also how does the Turkish society respond to it?
Amazing question. Well, he did do these things before, and he actually was a really talented orator from a very young age, and he always recited a lot of poetry. So this is really one of his talents. He is a very gifted speaker in all ways. So I know after 2016, that's the military coup, a lot of people died, but he was doing this. The thing that comes to mind is 2010, when there was this referendum it was basically to change the constitution, and it was to rein in the Turkish military. And the Turkish military in 1980 had been quite repressive and terrible to the leftists. And so he would show these pictures on TV of mothers crying and of leftists suffering, of which he was not a leftist, but he would get really emotional too. But he can say some pretty shocking things in his speeches. I mean, he's not Duterte, obviously, because he's more of a gentleman. But he can be pretty tough these days. He can say terrible things about queer people, about women, and very aggressive things about his opponents. But yes, when he needs to turn that on, and he's very knowledgeable also. I mean, he went to an Imam Hatip school, so he was trained in theology. And so, yeah, I mean, it's really amazing that you noticed that, but it has definitely been very effective in terms of his connecting with the people, but it turns off a lot of other people too.
Oh, okay, interesting. So keeping going around the circle, mic 1, please.
Yeah, Professor Haykel. I'm struck by the sensibility you described of MBS, such that he notices whether or not your teacup is full. Yet he had Khashoggi just so brutally murdered. So I want to understand the motivation behind that. And then also you touched on nationalists versus globalists. So what about his position on Palestine? Because he has vocalized something. Is that legitimate, or is it just surface? Thank you.
So, sorry, your first question was why Khashoggi was killed? Or why I mentioned that he has this personal side versus the public side?
Well, it seems an incongruency to me that someone who is so sensitive.
I don't think so. I think people are complex and they have many different sides to them. And he's extremely charismatic. He doesn't speak well like Erdogan does, doesn't have oratory skills, but he's a very charismatic person and extremely hospitable. And you can see him on videos with ordinary people and so on. So he has that side to him, and then he has the repressive side where he has 3,000 plus people in prison. So, those are not mutually exclusive aspects of
brutal
who he is.
murder.
Huh?
Gruesome, brutal murder in the eyes of the globe.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't understand the motivation. What would be
politics.
the motivation?
I mean, the motivation of repression is because he thinks that's necessary for him to stay in power. and to change the society. I mean, I don't justify it. I'm telling you this is how he sees it and this is how he explains it. And he is self-aware, and he thinks that, but all autocrats, will tell you that, yeah, I shouldn't be repressing, but, I have to do it to keep order and stability. That's the classic line of all autocrats. And repression is not unique to him. I mean, American presidents also drone people all the time, including American citizens without permission. So that the nature of power is extremely brutal. And he's not brutal like Saddam Hussein was or like Sisi in Egypt is, but he's a brutal guy.
So we're going to go 3 and then to a remote question and then... Oh, okay, yeah, sorry, go ahead. She also asked about MBS's view on Palestine.
Oh, on Palestine, yes. So first, the youth that I told you that really like him were not politicized in Saudi. They're kind of like a TikTok generation that weren't seeing anything on Palestine at all. And then once the Gaza war started, they started seeing images, and they became politicized through social media. And this is a society where you have at least 11 million people on Twitter or on X. So it's a very, it's one of the most penetrated societies when it comes to social media use. And they became very politicized. And I looked at the number of contributions, donations that the Saudis made. More than half the population contributed to the Palestinians after the Gaza war started. So MBS is extremely, and he polls constantly his own people on many different issues. So he's extremely aware of what his own people feel and think. So he knows that Palestine is important. So that's something, so he's responsive to that sentiment. Does he personally care about Palestine, or it's hard to say. He doesn't have any respect for the Palestinian leadership at all. He also would like Hamas to be obliterated, as well as Hezbollah. So in that respect, he's maybe not in sync with some of his own people. He doesn't like Islamists at all. And so he is insisting on a pathway to a Palestinian state by the Israelis recognizing a pathway to the Palestinian state before he normalizes. And then the question of normalization is tied up with the fact that he wanted to extract a mutual defense treaty with the United States. In other words, he was using the Palestinian question and the normalization with Israel in order to get all kinds of things from the Americans, which became impossible once Trump became president. So normalization is no longer as important as it was earlier.
Interesting. Okay, let's go up here to mic 3, please.
Hi, Professor Haykel. I'm Chris Barr from Yarmouth. You alluded briefly to the initial kind of 5 years of nuttiness, which included snatching the Lebanese prime minister, the blockade of Qatar, the air war in Yemen. Would you put the collapse of the line in Neom in that kind of bucket of nuttiness? And then kind of looking outward, what does MBS see as his relationship with the broader GCC, like Qatar, or non-Gulf players like Egypt or Jordan? Thank you.
Okay, so the line, by the way, is this 100-mile-long city, mirrored city, that was meant to be built in this area, northwestern Saudi Arabia, the size of Massachusetts. It was originally supposed to cost $500 billion. In fact, it ended up costing several $1 trillion. It also required certain technologies that actually don't exist, like elevators that move sideways and up and down and all kinds of, so it was a futuristic kind of city that has now basically more or less ended. And so that was part of like the big vision of transformation that he came with to galvanize his people around him. And yes, there was the war in Yemen. The Prime Minister of Lebanon is a bit more complicated because the Prime Minister of Lebanon was involved in all kinds of corruption in Saudi Arabia, and that was the principal reason for the way he was treated. so what I see happening in Saudi Arabia is the kind of the silver-backed bureaucrats who were not in the picture have come back in a big way, and the old government kind of structures have now surrounded him, and you see Saudi Arabia going back to a policy that is much more prudent, much more cautious, and I think it has to do with both him changing and maturing, but also this group of advisors that he now has around him. So Neom definitely was part of the kind of nuttiness as well. What was your second question, sorry?
Where he sees Saudi Arabia's relations.
Oh, yeah. So with the GCC, yeah. So Saudi, as I told you, is bigger than Western Europe, and it's 24 million people, whereas the other countries of the Gulf are kind of these Lilliputian states, with 1 million people in Kuwait, maybe 250,000 in Qatar, perhaps 1 million, 1.2 million in the UAE. So it's a 600-pound gorilla. It's what France is to Monaco, That's the Saudi perspective. And of course, the Lilliputian states, the city-states, don't see themselves that way. They think they're equal. And there's always going to be this structural tension between them, between this kind of big country that sees itself as the leader of the region and the smaller countries that also have oil revenues and fancy themselves, powerful. And you see that on full display today, as we speak, in the clash between the UAE and Saudi Arabia.
Well, let's go to the screen. This is a question about Turkey, and it's from Jeff Thaler in Falmouth. Erdogan's 2023 win drew on rising Turkish global imagery. How does this compare to Putin's use of foreign military actions to boost national pride, and might Erdogan pursue a similar path this decade?
Great question. I don't know what he's going to do in the next day. I don't know if he's going to be around. I don't. Oops, probably shouldn't have said that. I don't know. So, but let's just say what he's done so far, which is yes, he was using a lot of. He brags a lot about their technological achievements, which is a new thing for Turkey, as you might know. His son-in-law Selçuk Bayraktar. He's building drones. They were used in Ukraine. They're very, very proud of this. And they're proud of this because, again, what we're especially the Islamists, were very angry about relying on the United States and what that meant about Turkey. And they wanted to build their own military, their weapons. And so this is definitely part of their platform. They have this thing now called Technofest, which I haven't been to. It's shame on me. But it's like a big family-friendly weapons fair where like everyone can go and learn about weapons and science and it's a very jingoistic kind of thing. So this is definitely part of his platform these days, but who it appeals to, I'm not really sure exactly.
Up here we had a question on mic 4.
Do you see similarities between Erdogan and MBS and like in terms of how they came to power and like are either of their ways of ruling more stable than each other? Like
since Bernie has met both of them, I'm going to give this, and I have not. I'm going to give this.
Yeah, no, I mean, as you heard, I mean, Erdogan came to power through elections, and you still have elections in Turkey, and there are political parties, there's opposition, so he's a populist and an authoritarian, but he still functions within a country with, with a parliament, with institutions. He's had to take over, control the police, the judiciary, all of that sort of thing. Turkey is a much more institutionalized country than Saudi Arabia is. Saudi Arabia is an absolute monarchy, so MBS didn't come up through elections or through institutions. He came up because he was able to play the kind of Shakespearean power politics of the royal court, and then his father's favor, right? So he's a kind of operator within the system. And he doesn't have to deal with the same institutions, except informally. Like, he informally deals with tribal people and religious people and so on, but there are no formal structures that he has to contend with, and certainly no elections. But there are similarities in that they both appeal to nationalism and populism, and they both have autocratic tendencies, obviously. but the contexts are quite different.
Before we go up to 3, I'd like to just throw in a question for you, actually, because you closed your presentation with that really interesting story about what members of the opposition had said about not replacing the leadership of their own parties. And the question that popped into my mind was when you said that they had told you only an entirely new politics can defeat an authoritarian. Did they tell you what that kind of new politics might be? In the Turkish context, if you don't want to expand beyond that.
No, I unfortunately, and yes, I probably shouldn't have been tantalizing with that if I didn't have it. I'm a journalist, I don't have solutions. No, they didn't, but I think it was that it was a new face for them. It was a new type of politics for them, right? And İmamoğlu actually is a little bit more similar to Erdogan in the sense that he's from the same region. He goes to Friday prayer. He can go to a concert. I mean, that's different about him. He's a bit tougher also, and he's charismatic. And I think, and he's sort of let go of some of these old. A lot of old Kemalist ideas. So I think that, that sometimes in opposition parties you have these leaders who just won't go. And I think that it's a signal to the people that you have recognized your failures and that you are going to provide someone new, a new option for the people. And I think admitting those failures and then gracefully bowing out would be great everywhere in the world.
Brilliantly put. Let's go up here to mic 3, please.
It's on? Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you to both for speaking today. I'm Tyler Lissy from the School of Policy and International Affairs, University of Maine. I had a question thinking about, broader than the current US administration, how is the increasingly transactional nature of international relations legitimizing or complicating Middle Eastern leadership, especially within their own countries as well as between countries?
Yeah, I mean, look, before we get to the transactional, there's something that I noticed also with MBS and also with the French and others. Ambassadors don't matter anymore. Foreign ministries don't matter anymore. MBS connects on WhatsApp and Signal with everybody in the world. Like, there are these leaders that are communicating with each other through phones. They don't go through their bureaucrats. They don't particularly respect expertise or experience either. So there's something radically different about modern or contemporary international affairs and politics that wasn't there before. It would be unimaginable not to have an ambassador, and we don't have one in Riyadh, or in Abu Dhabi, or in Qatar, till today, as far as I know. And Trump kind of manages these 3 countries on his own, and he has his son-in-law and his best friend, dealing with them, and also their children and getting a lot of money from them. So, we're in a completely different world with this particular president than before. What's also interesting is that, the last year of President Biden's term, when America was negotiating something like 8 or 9 agreements with the Saudis, a nuclear agreement, AI agreement, mutual defense treaty, et cetera, you had a relationship that was building between the 2 countries, between institutions. And that was something that the Saudis kind of appreciated, that there was an institution to institution rather than what you have now, which is purely transactional. And the problem with the transactional approach, President Trump's approach in particular, is that Trump can turn on a dime like he did with India, with President Modi, and by imposing the tariffs, and because he didn't like something that the Indians were doing. And that's something that I'm sure MBS lives in dread of, that Trump today is Mr. Nice Guy, but tomorrow he could turn on you. Now, it's unlikely to happen because Trump also was politically socialized in the 1970s, and he thinks that the richest and most powerful people on the planet are the oil sheikhs. And so he doesn't want to cross them because he's thinking long-term for himself and his children. But, you have to always worry with a president that thinks transactionally and doesn't think institutionally or strategically.
Well, with that, we're actually out of time for this session. Bernard and Suzy, thank you so much.